It seems incredible to me, after all this time, after all that has been discovered, and after all that is now understood, that people will still say certain things and parrot certain lines that have been almost entirely debunked. And one of these claims, it's almost a slogan, is that if a female has a good upbringing, then this will somehow largely shield her and save her from becoming just another standard female of the current year, so to speak. And unfortunately, that claim flies in the face of all the evidence we now have about the nature of genes and environment. So, before I proceed any further, I want to talk about a book that came out quite some time ago, a book by an author called Judith Harris. And the book, for its time, was quote-unquote groundbreaking and for many people heretical because of the claims it made. And essentially, if you were to distill the entire content of the book down to a few key points, essentially, parenting doesn't really matter that much, right? Most of the things going to your children are the genes you give them. That's the biggest contribution of parents. And yes, there's the environment, but the biggest flaw in thinking that people have had for probably forever, and something this woman debunks and has subsequently been proven by the science, is that when people think about the environment, they're thinking about the parental environment, right? But that's the nurture assumption, and it's wrong. The vast majority of the environmental effects that interact with the genes that you as a parent have given your children, these are unpredictable. These are the effects of peer group interaction, of the vicissitudes of life. They are not accounted for in the upbringing. And peer groups have a far, far, far greater influence on individuals, both men and women, than do parents. Parents have a minimal impact on children apart from the genes that they contribute. Now, this flies in the face of sacred cows that people tend to maintain, but it simply is what the science and the data tell us these days. Now, the interesting flip side to this is you can do a lot to damage a child. You can damage a child massively through parental intervention. For example, physical violence towards a child can permanently damage that individual. Smoking when you're pregnant as a woman can permanently damage the child in your womb. Drinking, etc., etc. So there's a lot you can do to mess people up in general as children. There's very little you can do to quote-unquote improve them. So essentially, if you're not going to engage in some of this reprehensible behavior, if you just put a roof over their head and feed them, they're generally going to turn out as they're going to turn out. And how you raise them, their upbringing, in terms of the nitty-gritty details, is essentially irrelevant for the most part. So some of the silly ideas that emerge from this nurture assumption are, for example, that if you read to your children from an early age, they will become proficient readers. That is what is responsible for their reading ability and their inclination to enjoy books and read books in the future. Well, no, because children who are not interested in reading typically don't want to be read to, and then you end up as a parent catering to the natural genetic inclinations of the child. So parents essentially react to the natural genetic inclinations, proclivities of their children, and this is then dressed up as a type of upbringing when in reality they're simply responding to what children naturally want to do. Of course, is largely based on genes. So if you have a jock of a child, he might resist the reading, but he might be inclined to play football or hockey or baseball or whatever. And you then as a parent respond to that and you cater to that instinct, that inclination, and that's how it generally works. So hopefully having got that out of the way, parents don't have that massive an impact in a positive sense, but can have a very massive impact negatively. And so upbringing isn't that relevant. And we can see really just countless anecdotal examples of this. How many people do you know who were raised religiously, went to Catholic school, went to this type of church or what have you, who subsequently reject the religion? There are others who don't. And some of these instances, you have siblings, 50% related basically, who underwent a very similar upbringing, not identical, but very similar, in the same household. They both went to the same church. They attended the same Sunday school, went to the Catholic school that they were forced to go to. One of them believes that Jesus is the last savior of mankind. The other one never believed it to begin with, or rejects it later on. This is the result of differences in genes, but also the commingling of the genes and the environment. And you see that nearly identical upbringing doesn't always yield the same results, which again shows us how inconsequential in terms of the actual upbringing, the things that the parents do that are quote-unquote positive or at least neutral, how that is inconsequential to the final product of the human being in the end. Now, when you do have instances of positive reactions to a particular parenting style or upbringing, it's because the genes are naturally inclining the child to behave a certain way, and likewise later down the line in terms of peer group interaction. So hopefully we've gotten that out of the way. A person's upbringing is not massively responsible for who they are. It's a silly assumption that's been parroted in social science for untold decades, but modern genetics really has largely disproven this. So there's this girl who had that strict Catholic upbringing, or the strict religious upbringing, right? How many instances do you know of girls just like that, good daddy's girls, so to speak, who rebel later on as they chafe under the whip hand of their father and the institution of the church, as an example? Some of them stick to it, and the examples here are just legion. There are examples on YouTube you can watch of girls who are quote-unquote good daddy's girls. They arrive at university or in their final years of high school, and the corruption sets in, if you want to call it that. So I think this notion that the upbringing of an individual, in this particular case of a female, of a girl who later becomes a woman, will save her from the corrupting forces, if you will, of the postmodern environment is silly, right? That is not going to save her, and it's not going to save you. Because remember, peer group is much more important than parent group. Later on, she will get to know all sorts of people, and this peer group will shape her behavior and her thoughts much more than the parents ever did. And what kind of environment do we have in the contemporary West? So no matter what the upbringing is, the schooling, the education, the environment that this female is going to be put into is going to lead to less than desirable results if you're looking for a quote-unquote traditional girl, whatever that even means. And this is why, and I've mentioned this many times, if you really want that quote-unquote traditional setup, the upbringing is not enough. It's not even that relevant. It's the final environment that individual, that child, this girl who's going to turn into a woman is put into, which means if she's in a third world country with limited resources and limited exposure to many things, that's the result you're going to get. And that's a much safer bet than thinking, oh, well, this girl grew up in the same environment I have, but she's conservative and religious and blah, blah, blah. The veil of corruption, so to speak, is paper thin in this case. And there are instances of people in the West that just aren't plugged into the whole thing. There's a channel I watch sometimes by a guy called Yacht. Very, very thick Southern accent. He's from Mississippi. And his channel is all about hog capture. He traps hogs and eliminates them. Long story about hogs. They're an invasive species in North America and blah, blah, blah. The point is not so much that, but the fact that he found a decently attractive wife, and he is by no means a very attractive guy. He is probably not the highest of status, but in that contained environment of Mississippi, he is okay. He has status in the local community as a hog trapper, and his wife probably isn't spending 24/7 on social media. She too was isolated in that rural Mississippi community. So you can get it in the West, but let's be honest, a rural Mississippi community is not reflective of the broader culture. It's very, very specific to that area, and you can just see by his mannerisms, how he speaks, how he engages with people. It's a very, very alien culture. Anyone from the coast probably would be shocked. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you can get these oases of preserved traditionalism, if you will, but they're few and far between, and you're going to have a lot better luck outside of the West in areas that, frankly speaking, are third world, of very, very, very limited exposure to the outside world, and that's probably your best bet, right? No one's upbringing is going to save them, ultimately. And the way parents matter most is the way they give you the genes that you have. So if you chose the wrong parents, well, you done messed up, right? And next time, you can choose better parents. I just want to disabuse people, and men specifically, this notion that the upbringing is going to be this qualifying factor in how a girl turns out. It is not. And to the extent that it does seemingly have an influence, I can assure you it has a lot more to do with genes and peer group. But you can't go by the upbringing as the primary modus operandi if you're going to pursue a female. In any event, I would recommend that book. It's a very good book, The Nurture Assumption by Judith Harris, ahead of its time and still relevant today. And as usual, thank you for tuning in. Please hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos. I am utterly convinced now that YouTube is throttling my views. They're down something like 50%, and there's no explicable reason for it. So there's something going on, and very funky indeed, with YouTube, and it is very concerning. In any event, so hit the bell icon and do all the other usual YouTube stuff. I implore you. I'd really appreciate it. Comment, subscribe if you're not yet a sub, share the video, let other people know about the videos. And thank you for tuning in, and thank you for the support in as much as you give me support. And yeah, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.